Saying live now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you everyone for joining me. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. I'm just going to
Everybody.
double check that we're live in the right place.
Cool.
And awesome. All right. All right. So today's guest is Jennifer Bronsnick. She is a clinical social worker who specializes in anxiety in children and adolescents, right?
Yes, exactly. And adults and moms and, kind of the whole, the whole spectrum.
Yeah, I lost my little note, so then I was trying to find it. And
Yeah,
so
no worries.
her mission is to empower parents with tools and support to raise resilient children. Thank you for
Yeah.
being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I think it's so important, not only right now, but like when we get out of this situation. I think these are just skills that now kids are going to have, which I think is a fantastic thing, really.
Wow, I never looked at it like that.
Yeah, yeah, because normally it's the kids that are already anxious that you're trying to teach them the skills. Where ultimately these, learning about anxiety, and now everybody's sort of seeing that like everybody has anxiety, everybody
Right.
has this worry part. And so learning for each of us, one, that we're not alone, it's totally normal, and we understand where the worry is coming from. So now it calls us, because anxiety is such a great motivator, to figure it out. It's like, how do we get, over? Like, that's what most people are thinking. But for me, as a treatment professional, and I love prevention as well, it's you have to go through it. How do you get through it and
Mm,
become more resilient, more strong, feel more capable? Ultimately, I think our kids can come out of this so much stronger, even though I know it's so hard right now for parents, for kids, across the ages, like we were talking about.
right, right. So why don't we start with you telling us kind of your journey and how this came to
Sure.
be?
Yeah. So I have had anxiety my whole life, which
Mm,
is probably why I became a social worker. I grew up with a mother who was a social worker. And so I sort of saw it as, okay, how do I figure this out? How do I get over, like I was saying, like, how do I get rid of anxiety? Like, that was my goal because I was tired. Like, it's exhausting to feel anxious all the time. And so I was avoiding things, or I was using really poor coping tools. Like I was drinking because I was anxious in social settings. And so it was sort of through my own journey where I finally found a therapist specialized not only in traditional cognitive behavioral therapies, but also in mindfulness and hypnosis and meditation. And that
mm,
was a turning point for me because I realized that I had been going about it all wrong. Trying to get rid of anxiety is like holding a beach ball underwater. It takes so much energy, which is why I was so exhausted from my
yeah.
anxiety. And then once I realized, like, oh, it's not about getting rid of it, it's about being with it. It's about feeling the anxious feelings, but then doing the things that I valued. And of course, now we're living in a different time where that's sometimes hard to do. It looks different. But this was around 10 years ago that I began to explore mindfulness. And then that led to learning about like nutrition and how foods and certain supplements impact how our nervous system operates. I use human design, which is another tool that's based on birth information. So it's a little more woo woo out there. But I found it super helpful for my family and myself and understanding, I guess, having more self compassion, which is with anxiety. A lot of times we judge ourselves, we beat ourselves
Yeah.
up. There's a lot of shame that goes into feeling anxious. We don't want people to know that we are anxious people. What we see now, though, is that we're all anxious people, that this is normal, completely normal, that how kids are
Mm,
feeling, how we're feeling. This is just our brain doesn't know what's happening. It
yeah.
has never been through this before. It's feeling the sense of uncertainty and discomfort, and anxiety hates that. Anxiety wants to know all the time what's next.
Right.
And when we can't, we have nothing to tell it, it just can spiral if you don't have some tools. to deal with it.
Interesting. I can relate to your journey because I have been anxious my whole life,
Hmm.
and I probably didn't relate it to that until, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But up until that point, it was just like, this was just my normal, right?
Yeah.
And so, what can you say about anxiety and the different ways that people express it, and they may not even be calling it that or
Yeah.
recognizing that?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the brain and how that works. I think that that's really helpful to understand that we are designed with this brain that is constantly looking out for danger,
Mhm.
every single one of us. And so what happens is either we have a thought, sometimes there's a sensation, sometimes there's something in our environment or a specific person that can trigger our amygdala, which is the part of our brain that's like that watchdog that's without words. It's purely about let's get you into action. And it's amazing to have that when there is a tiger around the corner or
Right.
when a car is coming at you. We don't want to get rid of our amygdala. And lots of people would love that. They think they would love that, but really we just want to learn about it and know how to work with it. So the amygdala, once it has, this, oh, I'm not safe, it immediately, within a second, sends a message to your adrenals that flood your body with chemicals,
Mm.
hormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and it creates these really uncomfortable symptoms in the body. So we get numb, we get tingly, our heart starts to beat faster. Our prefrontal cortex, the brain, the part of our brain here that does the thinking and is the part that can rationalize and be like, no big deal, that shuts down. And also our digestive system shuts down. So if
Wow.
we have just had lunch and something happens, a trigger, we don't know, it could be anything, our stomach, it stops working. So the food just sits there, which is like, that doesn't feel great. So we feel nauseous. Sometimes people have diarrhea. They feel, like that sort of, which then leads to either shame or oh no. So it's kind of this like cycle that happens where it's like there's
Mm.
the first trigger, but then the symptoms come and then it's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Am I going to throw up? Am I going to, is this, all of our worry part begins to like sort of flood. And so once you can, and I found this really helpful, the minute I notice my trigger, which is like my heart generally starts beating faster, just being able to say, oh, there it is. There's my worry part. That's my amygdala. It's going off now. Okay, now I know what to do with this. Rather than, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. I'm going to end up in the hospital where, like my kids are all alone. Like that's
Wow. Yeah.
catastrophizing. And so that leads to more anxiety. But when we can just say, oh, this is a part of me, this is my worried part. And now I know my first sign, now I can do something about it. And it gives you the sense of empowerment, I think. And so you
Right.
asked about like how, so that worry part is going to look different in me and you. So you might get a stomach ache. You might get tingly. You might get ringing in your ears. Everybody has a difference. So, and you also, my worry part makes me really quiet. I go like right inside. Other people's worry part makes them want to run around. They get crazy, like they got all this energy. They need to like get it out. Other
Wow.
people's worry part makes them lash out and yell at people. And I get that a little bit too.
Mm.
Like if I'm feeling anxious and my kids come over, it's like, get away from me. Like I have a shorter fuse.
Yeah.
So, knowing like, oh, okay, rather than getting in this place of shame and guilt and self judgment, which doesn't help the process. The only thing that helps is awareness, compassion, and just being with it, acknowledging. And your kids are going to look different too. Like their worry parts are going to look different. Some kids need to be by themselves, some kids get really clingy. there's no right or wrong worry part, but it's helpful to just become aware of it. Like, what does your worry part look like, sound like? What does it tell you? What are the words it's saying? So that you can
Wow.
kind of like have this relationship with it versus like, get out of here. I don't want to see you ever again. Like, 'cause it's not going anywhere. I hate
Yeah.
to break it to you. Yeah.
I've heard that kids tend to present with stomach aches or
Yeah.
stomach issues,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which is what you were saying earlier
Yeah.
about.
And that was me as a kid. Kind of like second grade, I chased my mom's car every single day, the stomach
Wow.
ache. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
D-
And yeah, it was terrible. And I didn't know what it was. I thought I was sick.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So did you recognize anxiety within yourself?
Not
Or,
until I was much older. I mean,
right.
my parents, like, I don't remember this. Like, I've talked to my mom about it. Like, she took me to the doctor. I guess I met with like a school nurse or something. I never went to therapy as like a young kid when this was happening because it just wasn't like we didn't really do that. It wasn't sort of the
Yeah.
norm. It was they looked at it as like, oh, it's just typical normal kid stuff. And then at home, I was perfectly fine because a lot of my anxiety was separation anxiety. Like if I wasn't with my parents, it meant that I was not safe, that I could not take care of myself. And
That's
so
interesting.
yeah, so that, and I think a lot of kids have like that separation anxiety. And kids tend to be more anxious around their parents. It's because it's sort of like they don't need to be strong because they just trust the adults in their life are going to pick up that spot for them. And so then it feels really
Oh,
uncomfortable when they're not around. So we'll see what
oh,
happens when we go back to school, but I imagine we're going to have a lot of leg holders
yeah, yeah.
September.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. What can you say about separation anxiety? Because when we first kind of connected, we were going to talk
Hmm.
about learning and how kids can't learn when they're anxious.
Yeah.
And so, what can you say about separation anxiety? My daughter used to call home from school
Hmm.
like almost every day and try to get picked up.
Yeah.
And it drove me
Come
insane
home.
because
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was anxiety. I
Yeah.
thought she was just trying to come home and play.
Come home. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think with separation anxiety, especially when kids are in school, it's a team effort. So you need she needs to understand like that that's her worry part, wanting to come home.
Mm,
That's the part of her because there's another part, I'm sure, that likes to play, likes to be with her friends, enjoys recess, likes learning one or two subjects, maybe has a teacher that she likes too. So,
right.
all those things, like we want to pull out the worry part from her. Oftentimes it's like, you're an anxious person. No, you have a worry part. There's a part of you. So you can get mad at a parent at the worry part. Like, stop bossing my kid around. Like, my kid loves school, loves learning, but you have to get on the same page with them. And then you
Okay.
also have to get the school on board because what they'll do is they'll do sort of, unless they've been trained in this, they will do all sorts of accommodating things. We're going to just do this so that, she doesn't feel anxious, where
Mm,
it's always about, you can handle this. I know this feels bad, but you can get through this. And now, so what this is sort of healthy boundaries. So parents think that, oh, they're my kids. I have to be with them all the time. Like, I can't set boundaries. That's sort of the worst thing you can do. Kids need to have time alone, even when you're quarantined, even when you can't go anywhere. Kids need to know, mom and dad need alone time too. And you're safe and you can be alone. And I know we can come up with, 10 things that you can do when your worry part shows up to distract you, to make it silly, make it funny. So I think it's a lot of this sort of boundary setting without the guilt. Because
oh,
parents, I
okay.
think, feel so guilty, like, oh, I don't want to leave them. I feel bad. I want to go pick them up. I don't want them to suffer. They're not suffering. There's a difference, and we talked a little bit, I think before we started recording, about protection versus support. We want
Right.
to protect our kids, right? So we want them to look both ways when they go to cross the street. We want to make sure that we're not leaving the stove on, or that there are certain foods that they might be allergic to that are like accessible, or, like real things. We need to protect our kids because that's a life or death kind of thing.
Right.
And so now we're living in a time where it's really confusing. Like, we have to protect our kids now from the world, potentially,
Mm,
from going outside of the home. And so we really want to figure out, okay, what are the things that are really about keeping them physically safe versus showing up supportively, which is setting those boundaries. So, one of the big ones I hear a lot is sleeping in the parent's bed. So, kids, they feel, and especially I would imagine right now, there are a lot of children in their parents' bed.
mm,
So, I am not saying it's right or wrong. What I will say is that if you're a parent who is maxed out and overwhelmed and already is with your kids 24/7, to then have them sleep in your bed with you will lead you to frustration and burnout if that's not something that brings you utter joy. If you do it because you just want to sleep, um, that's one thing. But learning to, slowly set those boundaries that give you some of your own space. Like, you deserve emotional space from your children and other people.
wow, that's a big one.
And yeah, and like, parents that's why they're maxed out, is because they don't have that right now. And
Right.
nobody wants to be around anybody all the time. Like, we all need our own space to breathe and to just be ourselves, like, not mom, not therapist, whatever your other roles are, like, just to be Connie, just to be
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
it's hard. And the boundaries are the key to that.
Interesting. So, what parent behaviors contribute to anxiety? Because I can relate to the
Hmm.
sleeping in my bed type of thing,
Yeah.
because I'm just like, okay, I'm tired and I don't want to sit with you for like the next 3 hours waiting till you
Yeah.
fall asleep. And right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's exhausting to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what other kind of behaviors do you see with
Yeah.
parents?
So the big ones are accommodating. So we sort of, in my training, it's called, I was taught that it was called doing the disorder. So if anxiety is, let's say anxiety is like a person, right?
Yeah.
If anxiety is throwing a party because of your behaviors and the kids' behaviors, meaning you're just giving into it all the time. It's like, yes, I'm winning. Like, I've got this. Where we want anxiety to be like, oh no, this kid knows about my tricks, like that stomach ache and that feeling scared. We want anxiety to be like worried itself, that the kids and the parents have the skills. And when we accommodate, when we give in to, oh, we're just gonna, do this because it's easier right now.
Mhm.
Yes, I get it. I've got 3 kids. I understand. Like, sometimes you just have to accommodate because you're just maxed out. But
Mhm.
if you picked like one little thing, if you looked at your ways that you accommodate, ways that you give into her worry part, whether it's sleeping in bed, or certain foods she won't eat, or certain things she won't do, or certain things she has to do in order to do something else, and kind of just looked over all of those things and picked one that seemed easy, that you could begin to say, and you would inform her, okay, this is your worry part that's bossing you around. And I know that it's your worry part because I know that you want to do these things, but this is going to get in the way of that.
Mhm.
And then you set the boundary. And for you and for parents, it's sort of dealing with, because anxiety comes with rage and crying. And it can be very hard as a parent to see a child go through that, and then
Mhm.
and not to give in to them because we feel like we just want to take their pain away. But
Yeah.
ultimately, you kind of have to take this longer view of it. Like, it's not about the moment, it's about, in 15 years, how do you want your child to be able to live in their life. And so,
Um,
it's little tiny things that you just start to say, okay, we're going to set the boundary. We're not going to do this anymore. This is what's going to happen. And sometimes it can also be helpful to have like a third party, like another person, a coach, a mentor, a therapist, a grandparent that knows that this is what we're doing as a family. And so that your child can talk to them about like, this sucks or this is so hard. But over time, what it does is you are, teaching them that they can handle it, and that it's not because you're there that their anxiety goes away. It's because of what they're doing within their bodies. And so that's why you have to teach them those skills before you jump on and just pull the rug out. Like, I'm not about being mean to kids at all. This is
right.
about a process that you lead them through. You teach them about their, what worry is. You teach them about the worry part. You pull the worry part out. You get them involved. You ask them, what do you want? Like, I know everyone's like, rewards are bad, like, not with anxiety. You have to get them motivated somehow. So maybe it's a party that you're going to have, or maybe it's um, a puppy, like just some huge thing,
Right.
something that gets them to see, okay, I want this too. So I want, fill in the blank. So I'm willing to eat more than white foods. I'm willing to take one bite of every meal. I'm willing to wear different pants. And a lot of these things are around being flexible, because anxious kids tend to be rigid, and they
Mm,
tend to need to have things a certain way. Like, I have to do X, Y, and Z before I feel safe enough to do the thing. And so it's a lot of building flexibility, problem solving, helping them see that this is temporary. This isn't going to last forever. It's going to be over at some point. Those are all really important mindset shifts to practice with kids.
okay. And so when it comes from, so do parents, will children like see that like, okay, so a, an anxious parent
Hmm.
models that for their child, and then do they become anxious because their parents is anxious because of everything that's going on, right?
Right,
I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety happening with parents and they don't necessarily realize
right.
their kids are seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, so we have these amazing thing called mirror neurons. So we have empathy. We feel other people's emotions. Some people more than others. Some people are really, empathetic and really, take on other people's feelings. I
Mhm.
would say that, generally speaking, when you have an anxious child, you more often than not have an anxious parent in the home also, and it could be genetics, could be behavior, there could be, a lot of different factors. So I'm never one to like blame the parent for the kid's anxiety,
Okay.
because I just think it's not helpful. But I think when parents can demonstrate that, wow, like, I'm going through a hard time too. Like, my worry part is showing up, and this is what I'm going to do to deal with it. I'm going to get outside. I'm going to drink more water. Maybe I start exercising or start a meditation practice because I'm under stress, and being honest. Like, the world is changing right now. These kids can't go out. They know that something is happening. So we're not hiding anything from them. They know that their world now is different than it was a month ago. So
Right.
not having that conversation, that can lead to more anxiety. But you have to know your kid. If your child is already super anxious, you're not going to want to have the news on and see all of what the news is playing, because the news loves to make us feel afraid.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe you want to look for happy stories about things that have happened. So maybe the planet is improving. Maybe there are communities that are coming together, or, these birthday parades that people are having, or, something, so that they can see, okay, our world is changing, and parts of it are bad, but parts of it are actually better. And it's and so keeping kind of this optimistic, because a big thing with anxiety is also pessimism. We have this
Mm,
pessimistic brain where it's like, this is all bad, this is going to last forever, kind of this catastrophizing pessimism. So we want to, as much as we can as parents, say, look, yes, like validate the feelings, like it sucks. And some days are really hard. And we've had family meetings where, we've cried, the kids have seen us cry, they've been allowed to cry, but that we're also doing things. We're taking care of ourselves. We're, working on, like, I have this free challenge that I'm running that my kids help me with. So they're doing that. They're, connecting with friends in different ways. My daughter started cross stitching, like doing needlepoint,
wow.
so there's these things that aren't so bad too. So you need
Right.
to show, I think, a full picture rather than like just the bad things. And I know if you're an anxious person, our brain we're hardwired to look out for the bad things. We think, oh, it's going to make us safer, when really it just makes us suffer.
Right.
So it's,
Oh, I love that.
having that awareness of, and if you're going to talk about stuff with your kids, especially with the COVID-19, wait until you have gone through your anxious peak, I'll call it,
Mm,
or have someone else in the family, if they have questions, that maybe is a less anxious person. Maybe they want to be the spokesperson for your family during this time for your kids.
okay, so let's kind of break this
Yeah.
down into age groups. So
Yeah.
for like a school ager,
Cool. Yeah.
what would
So
be some good
young
information?
kids, yeah. So younger kids, like preschool, like really they don't need to know much. Like my 4-year-old like knows the name, kind of knows what's going on, but like knows she's not in school, but we don't go into any of like the news or future stuff. Same with my other two kids, ultimately. I mean, I don't really think any of us needs to be watching the news 24/7. I think if you get your town's update for what's going on in your community, like maybe once a day you check in, that is plenty. That's
Okay.
enough. It's just enough to be informed and stay safe, not to get in, because what kind of happens is we get addicted to the fear. And so watching the
Mm,
news, like we get sort of like an adrenaline rush, which kind of feels good. Like people drink coffee because it feels good because of the adrenaline. So it's sort of the same thing. And
oh, wow.
so it doesn't like feel totally terrible. Like there's a part of our bodies that feels comfortable with this. And so we just want to minimize that around the kids. So like no news on at home with any age group. Of course, your older kids, they're going to get information. So with
Right.
them, like with my 11-year-old, it's what do you know? It's having a conversation. Like, what are you hearing? Because if they're not hearing the good stories and they're only hearing the bad stories, they're going to feel more anxious. So
Oh,
you
okay.
want to give them the full spectrum. And then school age kids, to me, it's not so much giving them information, because really ultimately, we don't have a lot of information. We know I give them information that they need to know. They need to know that right now we're probably not going back to school this year.
Right.
So they need to know that. They need to know that right now they can't go into grocery stores, that, they can't have play dates. Like that is what they need to know right now. And basically, it's because we are collectively trying to keep vulnerable people like their grandmother and grandparents safe. And
Right.
so we're doing, our best. This is how, another aspect of anxiety treatment is, how do we get outside of ourselves? How do we look outside of our own needs to look at the bigger picture? And so
Oh,
when you can say, okay, this is what we are deciding to do as a community, we're all doing it. It's not like I'm mean mommy and my kids can't have play dates. It's everybody can't have play dates. you know
right.
so it's a little bit easier in that sense, because everybody's sort of in it together. Nobody can get together, everybody's sad, everybody misses school, but they're also becoming more appreciative of school and appreciative of time with friends. So it's looking at, again, both sides, at pulling out the parts. not catastrophizing, not having, if you're going to have a meltdown, which I have it in the car, go for a drive or go for a walk and let yourself grieve. There's a collective grieving happening, and it's okay to feel that and to feel that deep sadness about it, but you also can't sit in it forever. Like, you have to allow it to move through you and then get to the external, or, going on offense and saying, okay, so what can I do? What can I do? What are my skill sets? How can I be of service? Like, maybe my kids are great dancers, and so they could make dance videos that make other people happy or distract them during this time. So everybody has a purpose. I think that's like one of the most important messages, is that we're all important. We're all valuable, and that
Oh,
we
I love
all
it.
have something to contribute to this situation to help us all collectively get through it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then teens. We,
Yeah.
we were talking before we started recording.
Yeah. So with teenagers, I feel I probably is the worst for them, because they need their peers. Like, they really need to be separating from their parents right now, and their parents are just with them all the time. Unless you have a socially anxious kid, and then they're thrilled. They're not in school, that's a different story. But the everyday kid who's been in school, who's going through this, is having a hard time. I think it's giving them space to feel that, and providing them with opportunities to talk if they want to, but not necessarily talk to you. I really feel so strongly. I've been a therapist for many years, and many years of that was working with teenagers, mostly
Okay.
teenage girls. And they need someone, not their parents, to talk to about what they're thinking, because they don't know. Like, so they come to you crying about one thing, but really the truth is something different. Maybe they just started making out with their boyfriend, and, maybe they were going to go to the next step and they were really excited about it. They're not going to tell you that. Like, so they're not really
Right.
processing the truth. They're telling you kind of what makes sense. But you, as a parent, you're not going to hear the reality, because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get their phone taken away. And I would say, I sort of felt, and this could be a little dramatic, but with especially my oldest, who's 11, we had our family meeting. I didn't say this to her, but in my head, it was sort of like, her childhood is over. Like, I'm going to be relying on her for more things. She's going to have to be more like a mini adult than a kid. And so, like with the teenagers, like that, they're sort of advancing their age faster by going through
Mm.
this. Because anytime we go through a trauma in our life, it changes us. It makes us see the world differently. And so, I think for a lot of parents, it's how do you like release some of the reins, like let them, if they want to talk on the phone, let them talk on the phone. If they want to play video games, like, and there is a great book by Jordan Shapiro called, I think it's called The New Childhood, that's all about devices and screen time and sort of a new way of looking at that. And he talks a lot about, this is their world. If they want to document this part of their life through Snapchats and Instagram and posting, like, let them, like, that's how they're expressing themselves. Let them express themselves. And
Oh,
of course,
wow.
like, you want them to be safe. Um, but right now, like, I bet kidnappings are down because nobody wants to get sick.
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of, crimes are down. So, I would say, like, don't worry so much about the limits, and be very, think about what no's are really important. And are there other ways that you can connect? Like, play a video game with them. Like, ask them to teach you how to do a Snapchat or do a TikTok with them. Like, I
Right.
think we have to get to where they're at, and they have to feel like you understand me. Because if they feel like you're over here, I'm over here, we're on different boats, you don't get it, that's typical teenager, then they're
Mhm.
not going to talk to you. And then they're going to bottle it up. and they're going to have nobody to talk to, and then they're going to get depressed. And so that's what we are trying to, be very watchful of, is like check on people and just say, I know lots of people are feeling depressed. Are you, how are you feeling?
Right.
And, often.
And how about the conversation of why they can't go out and if they're determined to go out?
Yeah. I mean, this is a hard one. I think you really have to educate them about how it's not about them, but it's about keeping everybody in the household safe, as well as people in other households. Like, think about, your best friend's grandma who lives with you. Let's say that for some reason, like, you touch something and now carry the virus into their home. Like, it would be really challenging for you. And I think as parents of teens, like, you have to set up, you have to, educate them, make sure you put the boundaries, make sure they know the expectations, make sure they know, okay, this is what's going to happen if I find out you're breaking the rules. Let them know the town's response, like if the police see them gathering, what's going to happen. But at some point, they're teenagers, and especially if they're older teens, like college age kids, like, you're not a prison guard. You're not going to use physical force. You're not going to put bars on the windows. So at some point, there's a piece of you that has to surrender and say, you know what, I've done everything I can to educate them, to make sure they know my wishes, to make sure they know that it's about public safety, to tell them the risks. But if they're going to sneak out and do the thing, whatever it is, part of you just has to let that go, because it's just going to damage the family, which that isn't what this is all about. Really, this could be a time for families to come together and to, have these different conversations and to be more on like a friend level.
Right.
And all knowing, because parents right now don't know. That's the thing. Like, we're just as clueless as they are.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be, like, usually it's the parent, like, oh, I've been through this, I know. Like, we are collectively learning as we go along.
Oh, I love that you said that. I just told my daughter that this morning. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to navigate this either. Like, I am going through it with you. So yeah. What kind of tools do you use to help kids navigate anxiety?
So, education is a big one. Most of in my first session with people, it's a lot of what we talked about, educating them about what worry is, what is this thing that they're feeling. So that's a big piece. And I also talk a lot about things to reset. So with anxiety, we're not going to deep breathe to get rid of our fear. We're not going to, take a walk so we feel less anxious. We're going to do those things to get through the feeling, to feel those feelings and know that we'll be okay on the other side. And I think the biggest tool is mindfulness, is just being aware of what's happening in the present moment without judging it, without judging the feelings, your reaction. It's sort of this idea of just radical acceptance of what's going on. And then knowing, okay, is there something that I have control over? What do I have control over? I have control over whether I stay inside, what I put in my body, what I do with my body, how I spend my time. We can control those things. I can't control the president. I can't control my governor. I can't control how many people get sick, on a global level. Like, that is not my job. My job is to show up for my family, to keep myself in a positive mindset by doing things that enable me to have that, like setting boundaries and taking time for myself. And asking for that time, I think, is a big one. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, and then what about for kids? What tools to give to kids?
So for parents, it's a lot, and I have kids, they're going to be resistant. I find that when I say, let's make a video, let's share with other people, how what we're doing. They're more likely to get engaged. So I will do, like the other day I did, let's eat a chocolate mindfully. Let's do a mindful body stretch.
Wow.
Let's do some tapping, which is EFT. And so like they'll do it if they feel like, and this is just personally my kids, some kids are like, yes, let's, read a book about, whatever it is. Like every child is different, your kid. And so it's finding, getting outside. Let's go take a walk. That's a really good coping school because it gets you out of this rumination. Let's go play ball. Passing a ball back and forth, even passing a ball like this back and forth, can be really helpful for our brain. It helps to reorganize things.
Oh,
Getting
wow.
outside can be a great coping tool. Doing something that's fun, going for a bike ride, doing 10 jumping jacks.
Okay.
There's lots of, little, and most of the coping tools with kids, it involves their body. So it's getting them into their body and out of their head. If
Oh,
we're thinking, if we're ruminating, that's when we suffer. Once we get out of that and we start doing something, we put our body into motion somehow, we process what's happening in our head better. And I will also say sleep is really important. Making sure
yeah.
that routines are set, that there's lunchtime, there's breakfast time, there's bedtime, morning snuggles. Like as long as they know that's going to happen every day
Okay.
is
Cool.
really, yeah, can be good for them at all age. Like we all need routine on some level.
Right. So is there anything else that you would like to share regarding anxiety and all of this that's going on, or?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing is just make sure that they know that they're loved and that, you're going to be here doing your best. Because I think that's
Okay.
all any of us can ask of ourselves is, and my best today might be different tomorrow. Maybe I didn't get a good night's sleep, so maybe I'm more cranky today. And so letting them know, what, like I'm just doing my best and that's all I want from you. You don't have to be perfect, but I love you even when you're having a meltdown or whatever,
Right.
whatever behavior we're seeing. Because I'm sure we're seeing, parents are seeing a lot of behavior because they're not used to spending so much time with their kids, especially school age kids, especially kids that are upset and traumatized by, not having, their friends and this, school and all that.
Right. And where can people find you?
Yeah, at my website, which is www.themindfulfamily.com.
Oh, awesome.
And right when you get there, there's a pop up, and I have a free 14-day, call it a challenge because I couldn't find another word that I liked better. But it's basically 14 days of exercises that I recorded with my kids. So it's great for parents. You can show it to your kids to watch some of the videos. And it's just kind of these little daily prompts to get you thinking, how can I be more mindful? How can I, talk about gratitude with my kids? Because gratitude also is a really powerful, powerful tool when we're in a place of emotional disruption.
Right. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And if anybody has questions, feel free to, you can DM me too. If you don't want to post something on Facebook, I know that sometimes, like with anxiety and your kids, you don't want it to be all over the world. So just send me a
Right.
private message.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.